Hi, my name is Rick Adams from practicalcsm.com, and you are listening to part 2 of my podcast conversation with Nick Mehta, the CEO of Gainsight. If you did not listen to part 1, my suggestion is to go to practicalcsm.com/podcasts and listen to that first, because what you're listening to right now is the second half of that conversation. Just to remind you, in part 1, Nick talked about the impact that COVID-19 has had on the world in general and on the customer success community in particular, and some of the knock-on effects of COVID-19 that he sees beginning to emerge now as we, hopefully, start to move out of the worst stage of this global pandemic. He also discussed the relevance of customer success, both to software as a service and more widely to all organizations with recurring revenues. In part 2, which is what you are currently listening to, Nick continues our conversation by discussing the specific needs of senior executives in the boardroom and also the desires and needs of investors and venture capitalists when determining their investment strategies. We also talked about the need for a close relationship between customer success and customer experience, and indeed between customer success and other important customer-facing functions, including sales, product, and marketing, and strategies for maximizing their collaboration. We conclude our conversation with Nick's take on the future for customer success management over the next 5 years or so. I hope you enjoy this second part of my conversation with Nick Mehta, CEO of Gainsight. I'm getting excited just talking about it, Nick.
Same here.
Okay, so look, obviously you're 100% convinced, I'm 100% convinced that customer success management is a critical requirement for companies of this nature to invest significantly in. And no doubt, equally, customer success leaders who are listening to us are also in no doubt about it. But what about the senior leaders of these companies? What about the CEOs, the COOs, the CFOs, and others in that very top tier, the board of directors? Why should they be interested in investing in customer success right now? And how, what these types of people, they are making decisions using different criteria than perhaps the average customer success manager thinks about on a day-to-day basis. So why should they be interested in investing in customer success, and how do we reach them, and how do we evangelize customer success to them?
Yeah, that's, given what I do, I end up speaking a lot to CEOs of businesses about this exact topic, Rick, as well as to investors and private equity. And I'll just share some anecdotes because I do think it's changing a lot this year.
Thank you.
It's been changing for some time, but it's sort of just accelerated this year. One anecdote, last night we had a virtual happy hour, which I'm sure you've done some of now, with some of our clients. And, we asked them, what's happening more of in COVID-19 and what's happening less, right? What are you doing more of? What are you doing less of? And universally, everyone said our CEOs are more focused on customer success. So that anecdote I told you is definitely happening, in general.
That's great to hear.
And it's great, yeah. And now why is it happening? Well, I think there's a couple different reasons. I'll talk internally inside the company, then kind of external pressure. So internally, we did a survey of CEOs and kind of CXOs at publicly traded technology companies, and then some of the bigger private companies. And we said, rank all the initiatives in your kind of overall world of sales and marketing, meaning getting new customers, generating pipelines, cross-sell, everything. And what we found was that and we said, each of these, are they very important, somewhat important, not important? The 100% of the participants said the most important thing, very important, is preventing churn and understanding churn, so being able to predict it. And then after that, understanding product adoption and driving adoption. And new sales was way down, not because they don't want it, but because things have slowed down, right? And so that was a really interesting kind of lens into how they're thinking about the world right now, which is retain your customers, get them to use your products better, get them to see more value. And so internally, I think that dynamic is happening. Again, they always knew they needed to do it, but I think they're seeing the pressure. Yeah. Externally, probably part of the pressure is coming from investors. So investors have really doubled down in this downturn on the recurring revenue. So I've done a number of calls with investment banks where they bring all of their clients, meaning all their big investment managers and hedge funds on. They interview me and they ask me to talk about retention and how to measure it, and basically what questions they should be asking their investments, right, of retention, because they want to get smart on it because they know it's so important for the profitability of these companies. And then in the private equity world, we just did a little count. I've done since March 15 webinars with private equity firms to their portfolio companies about what is happening in the world of customer success, what the best practices are in keeping your customers, because private equity firms realize to get through this crisis, we need to do a good job with our customers. So you kind of have the choir that we're preaching to, you and me, always believing in it. The CEOs always believing in it, but now seeing like the why now. And then the investors kind of putting in the pressure from the top. All those three things together is kind of why it's different. The last thing I'll share is that what's a big thing I'm seeing now is people are doubling down on it so much that they're saying, wait, let's not just talk about customer success management as a function. That's great. That's important. Let's talk about how we can all align around customer success. And I kind of think of this triangle of you've got on one vertex of the triangle, you got the kind of CS and post-sales function, right? The one you and I and probably some folks listening. The next vertex is the sales team. And the third vertex is the product team. Those three groups, and by the way, we can add in marketing and others, but like product, sales, and CS need to work really tightly together. So in the last few months, we piloted this new executive meeting we do where we bring for a company, its CEO, its CRO, Chief Revenue Officer, its Chief Product Officer, and its Chief Customer Officer together in a meeting. And we talk about how do you drive customer success enterprise-wide. And every company we've talked to says, I want to do that meeting because I need to get everyone on the same page. It's not just a CSM thing. Great. It's a company-wide.
Yeah. Now there's so many things I want to talk about.
I know, yeah.
Every response you gives me another 10 questions I want to ask you. So I'm gonna need to be careful because I want to manage our time together, and I don't want to keep you longer than we agreed. But I mean, so many things arise from that. And one of the things that I see time and again, people ask this question on LinkedIn, for example. Okay, there's lots of debate on this: is who should the leader of customer success report to? Right, yes. And there's a lot of angst about this. And some people say, well, it's got to be the CEO. It's always the CEO. There aren't any doubts about that. Others say, well, it could be the CEO or the COO, and others are sort of more ambiguous and it's different situations. So regardless of the exact answer to that, I think that the reason why this angst exists is because customer success by its nature is still fairly new. It's a new kid on the block. People completely get, there is no argument that every company needs a sales function, right? There's no argument that every company needs a product function. There's no argument there, but you could argue that customer success, well, where does that fit? And do we really need it?
Right.
And how important is it? Because we managed without it for many years. So, I think that one of the issues is that customer success in some companies struggles to be seen as being equal to and absolutely as important as some of these other functions that you mentioned, like product and sales. And I think that the way in which product, sales, customer success, and I would suggest that marketing is like a horizontal function that works through those three then. And enables them. They need to be on an equal footing, and they need to collaborate very closely.
Totally agree. They all have to, and I think that's exactly right. Is that you need each of them to be thinking, how am I going to approach this? And what we see is that product teams are starting to really focus on things like how am I getting better data so I really understand how people are using products? How am I using the product to drive adoption without the CSM having to reach out? So kind of almost like putting a CSM into the product, virtually speaking. And then the sales teams are working a lot on how do I actually do a better job handing off, why the client has bought to the customer success team. So you have this very clean line between the experience in sales and the experience in customer success. Those two trends of kind of in-application analytics engagement and then kind of pre to post sales handoff. Those are two of the biggest trends in CS overall.
I like that. And I think that one of the things that sales is great at is building, obviously, they spend their days building proposals. And a proposal is effectively an external business case.
Right.
And an internal proposal is a business case. And I think that one of the things that customer success need to get good at is building the business case for customer success. And what I mean by that is not the business case for them inside customer success, the one to present to the board of directors, that's written in the language of the board of directors, that they understand, that meets their strategic vision. Yeah.
That is so well said. I've seen a lot of the business cases that CS teams present, and I do think there's an opportunity to up-level them because I do think that boards of directors, I mean, there's so many different things that you could imagine they care about. One is that obviously they care about hitting the financial metrics, right? That's important. I think most CS people understand, retention, upsell, but they want to see like, okay, what's your thought process? Like, for example, let's say you say, we're going to hire CSMs, we're going to drive more retention. Well, take me through the thought process. Is that, what are the CSMs going to do? What data do you have to support that's going to improve retention? How are you going to know? What are the leading indicators as to whether it's going to be working or not? What is the goal? What are you signing up for? Are you signing up that if you do this, you're going to drive this retention? This is where CS leaders sometimes get a little gun shy, right? Have you done an experiment where you took some of your accounts and tried this and that drove it? So there's a lot of kind of, I think, nuance of thinking about the metrics side of it. And then I think the other side of it is boards really care about strategic objectives. So is this going to make us more differentiated in the market? Is this going to make us stickier long term? Things like that.
Yes. So it's the total customer value over the term of the customer lifetime is as important, if not more important, than what they're buying this year.
That's exactly right. It's interesting. I tweeted about this recently that it hit me that even Gainsight, even though we think about this every day, we all underestimate the importance of customer success in a fundamental way.
Yes.
Because when we look at churn, if everyone knows there's a churn, meaning customer left, and you have a churn rate, which is, looking at all your customers that left over the total customers, either in a dollar basis or a logo basis, that calculation misses one thing, which is that all those customers that you lose could have grown over time. So you are literally sacrificing not just the spend they have, but future growth, right?
Very interesting point.
That's what boards care about.
Yeah. No, that is a great point. And actually, yes, that was something I was going to talk about. You just reminded me again, when you were talking about venture capitalists, when you were talking about investors, both VCs and investors are very interested in the topic of risk, right? And,
yes.
and a lot of their decision making will be a risk decision. So they will expect to get more reward for more risk and less reward for less risk. They will have a risk appetite. They will want to spread the risk. Everything's risk. What's the risk? How quickly will this return, and what's the risk, and how much is the return? Those are the three questions. There aren't any others. So
that's it. Yeah, you said it very well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So going back to your point about retention and about the ability to not effectively to be able to relax on net new because
yes.
you're so strong on retaining, that reduces risk within an organization. It is harder to get a new customer than it is to continue selling to your existing customers if you've got great retention rates. So if you want to sell your business as a CEO, if you want to sell your company to somebody or float it on the stock exchange and get investors to invest in it, they're going to be looking at your retention and they're going to be saying, well, this is a low risk business because we know next year they're going to have this amount of revenues because every year, 80% of what they sold last year, they're going to sell it again to the same people.
You got it. That's why the software service model, the cloud model is so attractive, but it's only attractive with a good retention rate. It's very unattractive with a bad retention rate.
Yes, right. Hugely unattractive because you've got to sell it for 5 years to get the same as what you would have sold it for if you'd sold it on-prem.
That's exactly right.
And is this in the business case? Is this what customer success leaders are talking to their CEOs and CFOs about and explaining?
Well, that's one that, you kind of pick a term that people, maybe for educational purposes, if you don't know, there's a term that people often use, which is called CAC to LTV ratio. It's sounds very a lot of math in it. It's not too complicated. It's basically looking at on the numerator is the lifetime value of a customer, and I think most people understand. You look at what's your projected spend for that customer over the years, and one way people do that is you take your average customer spend times one over
your average lifetime. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways of doing it, isn't there? There's
different ways of calculating.
You
have kind of your lifetime value, how much this customer gets spend over time. And then on the denominator is how much are we spending to acquire them in terms of sales and marketing. And, at the end of the day, very good businesses have high ratios of LTV to CAC, 7, 8, 9, 10, or at least, 4 or 5. But if you're in that world, I met an entrepreneur whose LTV to CAC is 1.5, and it's like, that's business is not sustainable. So they got to fix it. He's working hard on fixing it. And so I think that's when you think about like zooming out all the way, that's a big part of your value prop, is improving the LTV and the LTV to CAC ratio.
Which effectively means you have a lean, efficient business.
That's exactly right.
Okay. All right. So let's move on if that's okay. Well, actually, I say that. I wanted to just returning back to this concept of where customer success fits is one additional question I had about hierarchy here. I wanted to get your take on the whole customer success and customer experience debate, if I can put it that way. So, how do those two fit together? What's the relationship between them, and how do they work together? How do they combine?
So we think that in general, customer success and customer experience are like two very passionate communities that are extremely related together and really just have kind of like more in common than not. And if you look in general, companies sometimes had customer experience initiatives that didn't have like staffing and support, right? And so customer success is bringing a lot more of that support and execution. So at a tactical level, I think they kind of reinforce each other well. At a strategic level, we put up this equation to kind of like try to simplify it. And maybe because I'm nerdy and I like equations, we threw this out a few years ago. And it says customer success, CS, equals CO plus CX. It equals the combination of getting your customers to the outcomes they're looking for, CO, with a great experience, CX, right? And those two things need to be done together, because if you think about a business purchase, people don't just purchase for a good experience. It's not like you're like, hey, let me buy some Oracle licenses just because I love the feeling of docu-signing the quote, right? Nobody's ever done that. Because they want to solve a problem. That's what the outcome is. They're trying to, sell more product or make their employees happier or reduce their cost. There's a business outcome. But they want to do it with a good experience because they want to actually have a good experience working with the vendor and have a good partner. And so if you're a vendor that has bad experience and good outcomes, the customers might be stuck with you, but eventually they're going to try to leave and they're not going to buy new stuff from you. If a customer on the flip side has great experience and they love you, but they don't have any outcomes, the next person that comes in with that executive role is going to say, why are we still with this vendor, right? And the key is to do both. And actually, some people have taken this equation and said it should be CS equals CX times CO, because it should be like multiplying on each other. And if you do a zero on either side, you get a zero, right? So I think there's a lot of ways you can kind of take that forward. So at a strategic level, it's that these two things reinforce each other into this bigger picture that we're talking about here. And then the last thing I'd say is in companies that have customer success teams, particularly these cloud companies, I think that what's happening now is they're saying, you know what, we need a customer experience initiative, maybe underneath the chief customer officer. And we need to actually have somebody looking at end-to-end experience, because it's not just about the customer success team. It goes all the way from the marketing of the website to the sales, the whole journey through implementation, looking at the billing experience, looking at the experience coming to our conferences. And so some people are elevating like a VP of experience, customer experience, underneath the chief customer officer, who's not owning day-to-day retention renewals, but looking at the whole thing end-to-end. We did that ourselves. We have a VP of customer experience now reporting into our chief customer officer, and he's been amazing, finding insights across the business, helping to make changes to our product, and just kind of outside-in thinking. So these two things work really well together.
For me personally, I mean, my preference is the latter, what you've described there, because I agree with everything you've said, aside from the CS equals CX plus CO, which doesn't do it for me, but I get it, and I don't take particular issue with it. But to me, customer success is customer outcomes, right? The two of this it's two ways of saying the same thing. I mean, what is customer success if it is not customers getting what they wanted? That is what's the definition of it. So to me, I like this concept of this overarching chief customer officer who is there, as in the words of Gene Bliss, is there to represent the customer at the board and to sort of look after their interests almost, and be the voice of the customer in the board, who then, as you said, doesn't necessarily have executive control over anything, but has an overarching control over the entire journey that includes, right from the very first who is this company and what do they sell? I've never heard of them before, right the way through to, I'm an ongoing years old client of theirs, and I use them all the time and would recommend them to anybody. I'm a great advocate of them, and everything in between. And that entire journey, of course, customer success only has one part of that journey, which is kind of, if there is such a thing these days, post-sales, if I can call it that, which if someone was to say, well, there's no such thing, I would totally get where they were coming from. But to have a joined up, customers want a joined up experience. We need to give them a joined up experience. And having that chief customer officer who maybe has authority over or has some kind of ability to help the collaboration between those the three parts of the stool that you were describing, plus marketing as well. So the product, sales, customer success, and I would say marketing as well, I think could be really, really powerful.
That's awesome dialogue, and I totally agree with you.
Let me you've been very generous with your time. Let me ask you one more question, if I may.
Sure.
What is the future of customer success management? Where do you see it going over, let's say, for example, the next 5 years, Nick?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually hosting a panel on this topic, exact question, with SaaStr, if you know that organization, in a few weeks or in a week, and we were preparing for it. We were talking about what are the future things that are going to happen, and kind of where are things going to go. I think that the one inevitable future, if you just kind of said, what do you know for sure is going to happen? Customers are going to get more. If you go back to like the two customer success exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is that you have this recurring relationship where customers have power, and two is that you have more data about them. Those two things are only going to get bigger. Your customers are only going to get more power. And especially as you move to models like consumption-based pricing, month-to-month pricing,
right,
and you're only going to get more data about them. That's inevitable, right?
Okay.
So what I believe is that inevitably customer success is going to be a bigger focus for companies. But what I think is going to happen is it's going to cause people to reshape the other organizations. What's the role of sales in a world where customers are doing more of their experimentation and sort of selling themselves online through trials and freemium? What's the role of marketing when a lot of the customer experience happens after the initial sale, so you can't just focus on leads anymore? What's the role of product management when it's not just about your great idea, but it's about all this data you have about your customers, all this feedback you've got, right? And how do you reshape yourself? So I actually think, honestly, the sales leaders, CMOs, and CPOs, product leaders of the future, are going to have to rethink their jobs too. Up till now, it's been a bit of like the CS team rethinking their job and figuring out their future, and other people kind of not generally doing the same things they've been doing. I think the next 5 years, it's like every other role in the company being rethought in the world where customers have the power and you've got the data.
I think that's very interesting indeed. Very interesting. Lots of insight there. Thank you so much, Nick, for being so generous with your time and being willing to share your thoughts and ideas with me and with my audience. And I'm aware of the value of your time, and I don't want to impose on you more than we already have done. But do you have any concluding thoughts about customer success management that you'd like to share with our audience just before we end our conversation?
I know, obviously, feel free to check out our book, Customer Success Economy, which is all about going into detail on the fact that CS is growing across many industries. It's reshaping many functions. And we have a lot of best practices of things like who should own the renewal and how should you compensate CS people and how should you do health score. So feel free to check that out. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, NR Mehta on Twitter. And great having the conversation with you, Rick. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nick. And I think that's a great way to end the session today is get that book. It's the second one you've written, isn't it?
Second one, yeah. We did one in 2015. And it was amazing and just sold so well. So many companies made it part of their book club in their company. And
absolutely. I think over 50,000 sales of it, I think.
I think we're like 70 now, if you can believe it.
Wow, yeah. Listen to that.
And it's translated into Mandarin and Portuguese and Spanish and Japanese. And yeah. So, and now we're on to the kind of next phase. So this is kind of the updates for 2020, because obviously.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, there's a lot's happened in 5 years. So if you've read the blue book, get the orange book. Yeah.
That's exactly. And a lot's happened in 5 years. And I'd say maybe to tie up this conversation, a lot's happened in 5 months too in the world of COVID. So
yeah,
everyone on the listening being safe and healthy, and your business is kind of thriving through this.
Nick, Thank you. I hope you'll agree to come back again in the not too distant future to have a further discussion with me. And I wish you every success with the new book as well. And, ongoing success with Gainsight, which obviously has been just such a massive, massive thing within customer success. I think it's been a boost to customer success itself, but by the way in which you've promoted it to organizations and to the world in general. So thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. Great seeing you, Rick. Thanks.
So just to remind everyone, I've been talking to Nick Mehta, who is CEO of Gainsight, on the topic of customer success, a post-COVID-19 priority. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And also please do check back at practicalcsm.com regularly for more free customer success related podcasts, videos and articles. And finally, if you've not already done so, please go to our website at practicalcsm.com and sign up for our free monthly newsletter. My name is Rick Adams from practicalcsm.com, saying thank you for listening to this podcast, and I look forward to talking to you again in future episodes.